everyone. I am your host, Jason Miles, and this is Revolution Podcast. This episode was a bit of a fiery one. A bit of a dense conversation. We got into the weeds on MMT. And boy, oh boy. If you're not a patron, you might want to be to hear this back and forth. To hear Varn and Kuba angrily agreeing. If you could see it, oh, it was even funnier to watch. It was pretty good. It was comedy. Patreon.com/BitterLake presents wherever you are listening to this. There are links in the description. So definitely on the Friday audio only, we have the patron audio only as well for the patrons. Because this one, I couldn't get him to stop. Like, I saw the clock, and I sent a message. We have a private chat that people can't see on the system that we use. And I'm like, hey, I'm cutting you guys the fuck off. And it was everyone, one more thing. I just want to say one more thing. I'm like, hey guys, save your one more thing for the champagne room. Nope. So I just assumed that they were gassed. No. Champagne room discussion did start off with a very interesting hip-hop discussion. And because I don't mind if that gets demonetized because it doesn't get the views, this is, select number of people that actually watch those, we got to play some hip-hop classics on the air, and Pascal gave his top 5 MCs. Everybody gave their top 5 MCs, even Deep State Kuba. It was hilarious. But the first half, this half that everyone's going to hear, was extremely informative. And there's one thing that Pascal kept trying to do, and I think he did as good a job as that he could do, because this is a subject that everybody on the panel is very passionate about, which is the understanding of MMT, the flaws of it, and how it could be used effectively. And bigger than that, how should we look at the argument of, well, how's it going to get paid for? Because that does become the dominant argument, given especially by the right. When we talk about these large public goods programs, jobs guarantees, housing programs, education for everyone, or post-secondary education for everyone. How are you going to pay for it? So we definitely get in the weeds on that conversation. But there was a lot of back and forth. And sometimes it got a little heated. More so in the champagne room, I will say. There was a lot of agreement that was made. And we do end the champagne room with a battle rap. You should just to hear the battle rap. That music means I've talked too long. I'm very excited for you guys to hear this. Wherever you're listening, give me a comment on what you thought about this show. Did you learn something? Do you want more of these? Let me know. I am
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. I am your host, Jason Miles, and I do want to apologize for being late. I see already in the chat there's some comments about us being on colored people time. I appreciate that. Even if those comments are by colored people. Oh, who am I fooling? I don't care. I think the shit's funny. But if you're new to the show, please hit the like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell because we are constantly adding new programming to the show. And sometimes I forget to advertise when new shows drop. And I've been talking about it for so long, I think people probably didn't believe me. But we actually did our first ever sports show yesterday, and it is up. It's called Beyond the Red Zone. There will be another host on there. That person unfortunately couldn't make it, and I filled in. So we had a very good talk. We had a deep dive conversation on the idea of athletes using activism as a brand, protecting their brand through certain types of passive activism. It was a fun time. And moving forward, we definitely did say that the show is going to be a call-in show. So unlike how we usually do this program, where we like to do the call-in segment behind a paywall, because I deal with too many of you crazy people, the sports show will be more of a call-in show. We'll probably talk for about a half hour and then have you guys call in, and that will be every other Monday. So excited for that. Also tomorrow, as you know, every Wednesday, we have our This is Revolution Presents programming where we host other people. And so movie night extravaganza with producer Forrest, who you may know has been a producer on Ben Burgess, Jacobin, worked on Michael Brooks' show, Katie Halper. If you're a leftist, Forrest probably has done production or does production for you. Kenzo Shibata. Actually, shout out to Kenzo. Forrest and my good friend Conan Neutron. Erica Stout from the band Motherfucker. And Francesca Fiorentini will be talking about the movie The Conversation, 1974. And that will, of course, be at 6 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. Now, without any further ado, let me bring in the man of the Mau Mau Hour, my homie, my co-host, my dog. He is the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles. Happy Black History Month to all my friends, comrades, melanated people, non-melanated people. I have an idea for an article that I thought of today. I'm wondering, should I share it?
For Black History Month or just for
yes,
for Newsweek?
If they'll publish it. Can I share it? Do you want me to share?
Yes.
Is Black August superior to Black History Month? People are like, what's Black August? Black August is the celebration of the Black revolutionary tradition. Everything going back to the anti-capitalist, the Haitian Revolution, the Black Panther Party, and all of that other stuff. It was created in the 70s, as opposed to Black History Month, which was created by Carter G. Woodson in the 1920s, which was Negro History Month, was generally more of a celebratory of first blacks. So the question becomes, should we actually have a distinction between Black August and Black History Month?
Why don't we just make Black History Month in August, and that way I can get a Black
I'm down with that. Black History
and
Month
a birthday present, and it could be more of a summer festival. Let's just Black History Month should look more like Freaknik in 1993.
Everyone knows that August is Black Family Reunion Month too.
Speaking of Freaknik, let's bring in our favorite white guy from the South. He's a little under the weather. He has the plague, everyone. This is a gamer right here. Who comes on the show? This is the perfect out. This is the perfect out. Hey, Derick, can you come on? Oh, don't ask Derick. Derick's got COVID. Derick's got COVID. Varn's got COVID. The COVID got Varn. But like the leftist Chuck Norris that Varn is, he is kicking COVID right in the testicles. He's got a wide foot. Please welcome from Varn Vlog, the Derick Varn. Oh, your sound went out because COVID got you. COVID, see, COVID just muted your whole shit.
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I was just having flashbacks to Freaknik when I was a teenager in Macon, actually. So that might be the COVID brain fuzz, but
can you imagine?
Oh, I can, because it was it and punk concerts would happen simultaneously, and it was like a
no shit.
Yeah, and it would lead to interactions that didn't normally happen between different kinds of white people and different kinds of black people who normally hide from each other.
Peaceful though, but peaceful interactions
until the bankers showed up.
Word.
I'd like to make public point of request.
Yes.
I'd like to make a public retraction. Since my Black August and Black History Month theme is not going well, I'm going to change the potential subject for the article I might write. How about beware of neoliberal Black History Month?
Ooh, I can get behind that.
Yeah, but this was a make-in for those who were asking on this thing. So nothing. Yeah, I miss Freaknik, and I had no business being here.
Did Varn say he misses Freaknik? Wait. Did Varn say he misses Freaknik?
I'm Atlanta, Macon, an hour and a half away. Macon's also a mostly black city, so yeah.
Varn, you've been to Freaknik?
Yes,
I've been to punk shows that happen simultaneously.
He cannot lie. Varn is a liker of big butts. It's okay. He's from the South. He drinks Coca-Cola like
Varn,
it's fucking
I'm
looking
at you. I'm looking at you in a whole different way right now. That Varn has been, first of all, that Varn knows what Freaknik is, and that he's been to Freaknik.
Varn is Twizzlers like straws.
Varn is Sean King, officially.
This is
Varn has warrants and no driver's license.
I'm not touching any of that. I'm just staying far away from that.
Whenever he sees police, turn it down. The cow's brightest.
Varn has been to Varn. You've been to Freaknik. Now, were you at the old Freaknik when it was real gritty and grimy?
No, I would have.
It was the 90s.
I was gonna say this is in the 90s, and this is like when I was a high schooler, and we have like punk shows would happen simultaneously, and there would be overlaps and mixes. It wasn't even intentional. Like, I wasn't trying to go to Freaknik, but everyone would say like Freaknik is super scary because white
Black
people. And white people and black people, but it was fine. It literally until the bikers showed up, and the bikers would show up, and then like everybody would disperse.
Varn, if you tell me you've been to a step show, I'm gonna be officially like, yo, give him the Soul Brother secret handshake, because I'm gonna say, man.
I just want to offer the record that I am very, very white. So just so that no one can accuse me of being talcum Xy. Okay.
Varn was like, we're gonna go down to Freaknik, see some of them big old colored tail.
Wow, we got somebody in the chat who said he was at the tunnel. How does Michael McGuire know what the tunnel is? I'm from New York. He said he was at the tunnel. How does he even know what the tunnel is?
Hey, look, Varn does hour-and-a-half long streams about his time at Freaknik trying to talk secret with a Coca-Cola in his hand.
Someone said Pascal was hoeing doing Freaknik. No comment. I was kind of wild in the 90s. No comment.
Can't say that. We're a good, respectable show that children watch.
I'm just reading the chat.
My 15. Speaking of a man that needs no introduction. He's a very serious individual. You may know him as everyone's favorite middle manager on the planet-destroying Death Star. He keeps the stormtroopers in line. He's Vader's go-to guy. He is the Deeps to Kuba.
Hello, everyone. The key to job security is being the only one who knows how to change the toner cartridge on the destroying laser beam. No, Vader ain't gonna do that himself. And let me tell you, they burn through a lot of toner.
I was worried that Kuba was going to check out over the Freaknik conversation. He was like, all right, they already excluded me. This is way too black for me right now already.
Oh, no, I learned all about Freaknik when I was going through your files. It's a festival.
Whoa. Touche, Kuba, touche.
It looks like we're being rated, so thank you for the raid. I don't know who is rating us from Twitch, so shout out for the Twitch raid. I got to learn how to do that. I'm old. Please be patient with me. So it takes me a while to do the Twitch raid, but let's bring in our guest. As you know, if you've watched the show for a long time, sometimes I reach out to people that I see on the internet and I'm like, hey, this is kind of interesting. I'd like to talk to this young person. Our guest creates some creative video essays of leftist content on everything from the socialism of Warren Buffett to the neoliberal nature of hustle culture. And of course, what we're here to talk about today, the myth that taxing the rich is the only way to pay for public goods, federal programs. But is moving away from the taxing the rich sloganeering necessarily a bad thing? I don't know. We will discuss. Our guest can't show his face for fear of retaliation.
From Kuba?
Yes. When I told him that Kuba was going to be on the show, he's like, please don't say even my first name. I don't want him to get me. He's on YouTube and Twitter as OneDime. So please welcome video essayist extraordinaire, OneDime. Can you hear us?
What's up? Yeah, I can hear you. I saw the whole intro. It's quite an intro. But yeah, no, I only didn't want to show myself because, I didn't want Kuba to track me down and serial killer me. I don't trust that outfit. The tie, everything. I don't know, serial killer vibes.
I don't do the serial killing. I fill out the requisition that goes to the guy who does the serial killing.
But yeah, so I'm OneDime, name's Tony. I run the channel called OneDime, sort of like a collective because sometimes I work with other people as well. I kind of also want to eventually make it sort of into like a think tank of sorts, but more just like for videos. Good old leftist commie propaganda, cultural Marxism, your conservative dad's worst nightmare. But yeah, I pretty much make video essays.
That's how you brand the show, your conservative dad's worst nightmare, or is that how you talk to your potential dates?
Maybe I'm mixing that up actually. Maybe it's sort of confusion.
You're embracing the term cultural Marxism. I hate that term.
Yeah, I hate it too. I don't. Let's not even get into that. But no. But in all seriousness, pretty much I do video essays as well as sort of mini documentaries sometimes that are kind of focused on political economy and also using a variety of theory, primarily Marxism, also critical theory, to and post-Keynesian theory, most recently MMT, sort of just to analyze issues like hot topics. But that I think are often misunderstood. Sometimes it's just to kind of, I guess, introduce people who aren't super left or who are just curious to communist or Marxist perspectives. But sometimes it's just also aimed at the left when I think there's terrible ideas floating out there. Like you mentioned, not taxing the rich, I don't think is terrible. It's the way we talk about it that I think is terrible.
And what is your main beef with that discourse with taxing the rich?
Well, it's really touted by progressive politicians, news anchors, as if it's the way to pay for their big expansive programs like federal jobs guarantee, Green New Deal, healthcare, whatnot, even housing, infrastructure, and it's really misleading because even the people who say this, some of the politicians, don't actually believe that. Because number one, taxing the rich through a wealth tax, estate tax, however many taxes you want to implement, assuming they even get paid, which that's another thing. Taxes that aren't globally enforced are unlikely to never actually be paid by the ultra wealthy. They're always going to be able to find loopholes, tax havens, whatnot. But even if you were actually to collect like all this revenue, it most likely would not be enough to actually pay for these policies. And they know that. Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they know modern monetary theory, which is the I don't want to do I have to summarize modern monetary theory, but
Actually, I think that maybe one way
before you even get into, I'm sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think that it's unavoidable in this conversation to at least get into modern monetary theory a little, but I think one way to start may be the way that David Graeber starts Debt, which is talking about the sort of mythic story about the origin of currency as a barter unit, and tying it into the actual emergence of currency as taxation.
Yeah, that was one of my sources for both my two most recent videos, because that's kind of what really made MMT click for me, even though David Graeber is not really an MMT theorist per se. He's actually more of an anarchist of sorts. But his work is sort of cited often in MMT circles a lot by L. Randall Wray, who's a pretty known MMT thinker, writes about the history of money. But it clicks very obviously because the when you understand the origins of money, that the idea that money spontaneously arose from barter and thus evolved to horizontal market exchange is a myth. Not only is it not backed by evidence, there actually is no evidence. Adam Smith just literally assumed that to be the case. He got it from Aristotle, who Aristotle assumed that money came from barter. But there's just not any evidence of this, really. For the most part, money originates really from the state trying to direct economic activity. Now, for those who are the nerds there, will know that this is not really new. I mean, there's a old school thought called chartalism that...
But original chartalism held barter theory, too. Like, old
No.
chartalism. Knapp did. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Knapp held that the origin of state money was in barter.
Let's look up
Maybe
the
not
Wikipedia of barter.
chartalism when we still need to
I don't think it's
explain
particularly friendly to our
origin of
audience to
money.
argue terms that most of them, and definitely most of us, don't even freaking understand.
Pascal and I agree.
Regardless, but
you're right.
the main idea, when you understand money usually it's not, if you look at the origin of money, it's not like a state arises here and then goes to the population and says, oh, hey, we need to collect some of your money. Well, how does the currency get there? Let's look at where any of us live. Let's say United States, US dollar. How do people get their money? There's only two currency issuers, really. You could boil it down to two. Primarily, the monopoly issuer is the US government, really directly the central bank, and also private banks. Private banks create a lot of money via the creation of debt. Now, this is when you already look at the origin of money originating much more through the state, as opposed to this decentralized barter exchange. it disrupts the whole idea that you have to tax first before you spend. It's kind of actually the other way around. You spend first, tax after, and the taxes aren't to collect the money. I mean, why would the state need more of the money that it can create virtually as much as it wants? The only constraints being inflation and resource constraints. You can print U.S. dollars. They don't print it; they create it digitally. But you can't print tanks. No, that's human labor creates that. Human labor creates the stuff, the real wealth. The money is the unit of account. But this sounds obvious, right? But it's not the way we talk about things. We talk about things as if you just got to tax it like a wheelbarrow of cash to go fund these programs, when it's just not like that. How specific you want to get into like origin of money, it's more complicated. But the taxes aren't there to fund things on a federal level. They're used for a variety of purposes. One can combat inflation through controlling the money supply. Incentives, you can incentivize some things and others. Also, it's really just a coercive form to really for the state to provision itself and kind of submit the public. A very visible example of this is when when Britain used with colonies, it would impose these taxes called hut taxes in Africa. Mm-hmm. And if they, for example, okay, how do the British pounds get there? They circulate them, and you create a tax. You need to earn British pounds or whatever currency they used back then, or else we burn down your hut. And why do they do this? Not because the tax isn't. They don't need the people they colonize. They don't need their money. They want them to work, specifically create coffee for them, do all sorts of labor. So you see, it's a coercive form, very tied to the state. It's not, but it's not to fund things, right? It's very obvious when you look at the history, even obvious if you look at now, just the way money is so arbitrarily created by central bank and private banks. Yeah, I mean, you could go into a lot greater detail, but I don't want to bore the audience with it.
And I just want to pick up on that. Right now we're at a very late point in the financialization of the economy. So it's difficult for many people to imagine disentangling real economic output from financial stores of value. But the real economy is all of the material work that people do to create things and to perform services for one another and for the state. And the money is just an accounting mechanism, a claim on that labor and on those resources. Mm-hmm. The state, by issuing tokens, right? And we've moved from any fiction that there's a precious metals backed currency system. Right now, it's all fiat currency everywhere in the world, and the system continues to function. But the value of that money is that you can use it horizontally, and ultimately, the fact that the government, the imperial government that is at the center of the world economy, will accept it as taxation for a kind of mandatory collection.
Yeah, that's another thing I actually left out, just forgot to say. But one of the primary uses of taxation is to give value to the currency because it creates demand for it. Or else you go to jail if you don't pay your taxes. It's a way to create value for that currency, because people will often look at fiat currency especially and say it's not back to gold anymore. Although, the gold standard was taken off in 1970s by Nixon, although it was taken off before that during World War I and World War II temporarily. And after World War II, barely even enforced that. About 1/4 of actual reserves were backed up by gold. Not all of it. But people will look, okay, back then there was something material to give this value of sorts. There isn't now. What gives it value? A lot of people will say, oh, it's faith. People just must believe in the US dollar, believe in the yen, believe in the yuan, believe in the Canadian dollar, British pound, whatever. No, it's because people have to pay taxes. Now, that's the main thing that drives value for these currencies. there's other things that can increase value. Imperialism is one way that the value of a currency can be increased, with the US dollar, but it doesn't change really the underlying role of taxation. Like there's plenty of countries that don't have like proto colonies, or there are plenty of countries where nobody uses their currency except them, like Canada, Japan, Vietnam, where much of this still applies.
And
I'd like to interject to kind of slow down the conversation, because one of the things that I'm kind of a stickler for when we're talking about finance and economics on the left is I think that we have to be particularly clear and careful about how we share concepts and terms, because the theme of this podcast is to do political education, and simply putting out elaborate intellectual theories about how money works that we assume our audience knows does a disservice to the goal of the show, which is to do political education. The first thing I think we can all agree on is that money is a social construct. It is a social construct, meaning that it's not like physics. It's not like earth science. It's not like rainwater. It's not created by the laws of nature. This is something that people created in their minds as a means to ascribe value to items for exchange. I think we all agree to that.
Well, actually, no. The money is an invention, absolutely, a social invention, certainly. And this is where I think the MMT theorists may diverge from other types of economists. The claim is being made that money is introduced by states in order to direct the economic activity on their in the realm that they coercively control, right, and the territory that they have, or over the people that they can coerce to use it. Value, and this, when you look at the early incidents of economic exchange, we go back to primitive communism. You don't have a need for some kind of token based system. Instead, you have autarky and mutual aid. So it's not ascribing value, it's directing human activity. That's the purpose with the invention of money.
I wasn't talking about the invention. I was just talking about the general methodology it's used overall. But we can go there as well. I'm about to go in that direction about the origins. I'm not getting to the origins yet.
Can I also say that there's another thing that's not being discussed here, and that is what kinds of money there are. Because
I didn't get there yet. That's I really want to slow.
Yeah, that's when you don't want to get into the nerdy debates with that.
Slow this down.
All right.
Okay. So we agree that money is a social construct.
We all agree.
We all agree with that.
Sure.
That people created with their minds, all right, to exchange something, either items or the money, or to exchange. We haven't defined what to exchange. We haven't said value, we have to exchange. Okay, we got that. Now, here's the next question, and they might be disagreeing with it. Does the origin of money come from the creation of the nation state? I will say no. This is my opinion. We can disagree, and that's fine. I would say it's not necessarily a nation state. I would say it would be more of a social constructed community. Because I would say in ancient civilizations, we had money, but they weren't necessarily the contemporary notion of what we call the modern nation state. They might have been empires, they might have been tribal, feudal society, but they were collectives of human beings living in a hierarchical structure where some moderately centralized, I don't know how extensively centralized, some moderately centralized force decided to issue an item as a form of value. Do we agree with
And
that,
I-
or we disagree?
You're basically right.
Yeah, with the caveat that when you talk tribal societies and feudal societies, most feudal dues were paid in kind, and currency wasn't issued at the level of local society, but you needed some kind of sovereign.
I
some
haven't even
kind
got the
of
currency.
high
yet.
level.
I didn't even get the
Well,
currency.
that's the thing. Anybody can make money, but the issue is having it accepted, which is where
Right.
the state comes in.
All right. So
But-
we'll agree that based on kind of the definitions I'm using, and I'm willing to be corrected here, that the concept of money is something that is even older than our modern concept of a nation state.
Yeah,
Yes.
we've had evidence of people using money since we've had evidence of people writing. So that's
Right.
the whole thing, is we don't actually really know the quote unquote origins of money. We know what we don't, what is wrong, rather, like about the barter story. That's more.
Right.
But the origin is really hard to tell because we've seen evidence of money and debt. I know those things aren't really the same thing, but we've seen some forms of money being used as long as writing. So that's
Right.
why what makes
Well,
it so strange.
We don't know the
And
specific.
not necessarily precious metals either.
Right.
Yeah,
Even though-
no.
and I haven't gone there as well. I'm avoiding that. Even though we haven't found a locus of the origins or the actual methodology, I think in this conversation thus far, we've come up with a pretty agreed abstract of how the process started early on. I think we're in agreement there.
Yeah.
The question becomes, because we got to remember something. Most people think money is like physics. All right. I think that one of the steps we want to go through in having conversations about opening the political options for economics is to start from this point, from letting people know that money is absolutely abstract as a concept, and it's only like physics because our minds are made to accept that it's like physics.
And it's taught in universities next to the physics department.
Well, that's
Yeah.
basically.
But I mean,
Mhm.
we're basically going through the first
Mhm.
like part of capital right now. I mean, the commodity fetish thing. But I would say that when you say that, when I say commodity fetish, we already have a distinction between us and MMT. Even though we're still talking about power relations and we're still talking about debt and credit. Because the reason why I made that obscure point in the history of the idea of chartalism is and I this actually isn't to discredit MMT at all. Chartalism is the idea that money is endogenous to the economy and specifically the state. The original idea in the 1850s came out of Germany, and it still accepted the classical economic view from Aristotle on barter. It was McInnes in 1910.
Was that Howard Innes?
Yeah. McInnes.
Howard Innes.
It was Innes. Who I need to make sure I got his name right, but I'm gonna who posited first that it was actually debt. That
credit theory of money.
Yeah, that credit and
yeah.
debt is what drove money, and then we found anthropological evidence of that. The thing that I think in this early emergence, and we're not going to get into what's being traded or what's represented here, I'm staying at the level that Pascal wants us to stay at, is the way money seemed to interact within certain societies, policies, states, quasi-states, whatever, and the way they acted between states was different. All right. And that is because the social trust is higher within a polity. And I'm going to use polity because it's the best I got here. So polity, just for those of you who don't know, it just means like a bunch of people who come together and govern themselves. Mm-hmm. Usually implies some kind of class formation too, but whatever. The polity has debt and credit relations, but there's social trust and there's the ability to enforce it because of social trust. and probably also weapons. But between different polities, all you have is either commodities or force. All right.
Define terms. What is a commodity?
A commodity is a thing, is something with use value, and use value is something that you use that has value to you, that you trade for Surf Standard. Now, the assumption for most of Western history is that, and it does go, and our guest is entirely right, it goes back to Aristotle. Because Aristotle is the only ancient economic writings that tried to come up with a system, and Aristotle couldn't figure out why people traded because it didn't make any sense to him. Was based off of barter, and it was based off of, the model was merchants between city-states. It's what he's really pulling from. And that becomes the norm because, in early modern stuff, all we really have is ancient Greek and writings for this early in history. We don't have good anthropology yet. And so what I think, though, this leads to two questions. One is, if we assume that money is a power relationship, or hides a power relationship, or I think in Marxist terms, but that the relationship is about acquiring and compelling the creation of our extraction of resources. But in most of these theories of money, they assume a relatively closed system, that the extraction of resources and the compelling of resources within the system itself. So it's within the polity. The question becomes, would this change during different time periods based to, and a polity's actual ability to compel or non-compel labor? So would money look differently depending on where it is in society? And I think the implication is yes, but I would like to hear our guests.
I'd like to add something to Varn. Is that I think that the thing that's most important here, and this is a term we use on the show every now and then, but it comes out of Marxism, and I think it's one of the most valued and undervalued terms. But when we're talking about money, I think it becomes very important, is that ideological superstructure. When we're talking about money. In other words, there is a social, cultural, and psychological effect that institutions and mechanisms in a society, outside of the raw base means of production, the capital, the money, the institutions, there are institutions that reverberate a certain social structure that infiltrate the minds of members of society to accept certain things that are true, real, and not true. I think we would all agree that we would call that the ideological superstructure of a society.
Right.
One of the most important aspects of money is that the ideological superstructure of a society, and I want to use this term. If you guys disagree, please interject, coercively causes people to believe that this item called money is valuable or has some merit as a means of trade. Do we agree or disagree?
Yeah. I should add, there's a really good book called Blood and Money by David McNally, which kind of says a lot of the same things as Graeber's Debt the first 5,000 years, except from a more Marxian perspective. McNally's a known Marxist theorist, probably might be familiar with. I mean, it is, there's no denying the coercive aspects, but regarding the specific debates about Marxism and MMT, I mean, if you want to keep it accessible for the audience, we should probably get into those maybe later if you wish, because that gets very technical. But I do want to say I'm not an MMTer per se. I'm a Marxist who thinks MMT is true, but I don't think MMT's politics are true because MMT doesn't really have a politics. MMTers have a politics. So
Okay,
like a lot of the issue with MMTers is they're pretty much social democrats, or more, I'd say radical social democrats of the Lassallean type. What I mean is they have a lot of the same goals. Well, no, they don't have a lot of the. They don't have the same goals as communists, but the policies they advocate for often, the MMTers, are stuff that you see implemented in like actually existing socialist countries, quote unquote.
Right. Yeah.
And the thing is, though, is they don't have a very good theory of social relations and power, as well as the class character of the state. All sort of critiques. If you notice in my text, the Rich video, the solutions I say, I don't just say, oh, okay, yeah, so the solution to everything is just spend money and give a federal jobs guarantee. I talk directly about private property because that's where the true source of inequality really is. And I don't think the MMTers, with a few exceptions, there's some MMTers who are there's some MMTers who also study Marxism, like Bill Mitchell. He'd probably agree with the property question, but I can't speak for him. The thing is I know that question is going to come up about MMT not having a power theory. I agree. That's why I was into Marxism before ever even getting into MMT. I more saw MMT is a really good answer to austerity ideology.
Can we interject for a second here? Because not to be redundant, I believe in defining terms. Frankly, there's going to be 3/4 of the people who watch this video are going to be like, what is MMT? I literally talked to a finance economist yesterday who watched the first video today. This guy manages funds of over $1 billion. And he said, what the hell is MMT? See? So let's make this clear. What is MMT? I'm going to try, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to try to give a layman's. MMT is modern monetary theory. It is an economic theory. I don't know the origins of how old it is, but it's relatively new. Relatively new. It didn't go back to Adam Smith. It didn't go back to John Maynard Keynes. It didn't go back to Milton Friedman. It's a relatively new economic theory. It is particularly popular because it is alleged, and correct me if I'm wrong, that people within the Sanders coterie, his supporters, his potential acolytes, administration, his advisors, were promoting MMT as a viable economic philosophy that he might want to consider implementing. One of those women was a woman named Stephanie Kelton. There's a book on MMT. Now, so that will get people to what is MMT. Now, next, what is the specifics of MMT? And I'm willing to be corrected if I'm wrong. This is the way I look at MMT. This is my opinion. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know Kuba will do it without a problem. My opinion is that MMT became particularly popular because of the ways in which, after the 2008 crash, the economic engines of American capitalism were willing to break normative policy to protect the financial interests of the banking sector, the investment houses, and finance capital. What do I mean by that? There were two policies, I think we will all agree, that started in the Obama administration that were done to not necessarily to protect the economy, but really protect the same people that got us into the 2008 crash, which is the banks and the lords of finance capital, Wall Street, the bond markets, and all of them. All right. We had the bailouts where they got, I think, $7 trillion. How much money did they get in the bailouts? Kuba, how much was the money that they gave to the? It was ridiculous.
It depends on, and this is part of the problem. That money,
what you count as money,
bailouts.
Yeah,
exactly. It's just an accounting measure. You could, depending on how you define it, maybe it's 7 trillion, but a lot of it is eliminated immediately within the system as debits and credits cancel each other out.
Allegedly, they said that to bail out the banks, they gave them $7 trillion. Let's assume that's true or not, whatever. Okay. That was not all that was done. Let's take that. Let's agree with Kuba. Let's take that $7 trillion off the table, because I would argue they got more money from the policies that the Lords of Capital created to protect, which we're going to get to now. Two things that they did was one called quantitative easing, and the other was deflated interest rates. Deflated interest rates are pretty easy to understand. The Federal Reserve, which is in charge of controlling interest rates, they have two types of interest rates. There's the Fed funds rate, and what's the other rate called? Varn? The bank to bank rate.
The bank-to-bank interest only rate, like
interbank.
The
interbank
Fed
loan
funds
rate.
rate. The Fed funds rate is the rate I believe that banks. Though there's one that is the interest that banks will lend to each other. I think that's the Fed funds rate, and the other one is the interest that banks will lend to outsiders. If I'm incorrect, correct me. Is that pretty much correct thus far?
I think that there's the interest rate that banks can borrow money from the Federal Reserve at. Then there's the interbank rate, which is horizontal between banks, and then there's a consumer rate, which
there's a few rates. There's a few different.
The one that matters is the interest rate, because that basically determines how easy.
Right. There's a LIBOR rate to the one.
The main thing is. So having low interest rates allows banks to lend at people much more easily. People can borrow much more easily. This is a way of kind of privatizing the creation of money. But how do they get those low interest rates? They heavily inflate the reserves of private banks. This is the central bank inflating the reserves of private banks so that these interest rates can stay very, very low.
Right. Well, basically, that is a job that's usually left up to central banks, which are the Federal Reserve in the United States. There are central banks in all countries all over the world. What are central banks? In the United States, I will only speak for the United States. The Federal Reserve is not a totally government institution. It's not a totally private institution. It is a hybrid institution owned by a consortium of large private banks with legal government functionality to control monetary policy. Not fiscal policy, not the budget, but monetary policy.
It plays a role in fiscal policy, though, because, like, for example, with the military budget, when how do they finance, let's say, these multi-billion-dollar budgets for the military, increase the military spending? Well, the Congress has to approve the budget, then they send it to the Treasury, and then the Treasury gets the central bank to basically create the money on their keyboard and deposit it into the commercial bank accounts of whoever, the accounts of the actors needed to do those policies.
I don't disagree with you. You're getting a little bit more complicated than I want to go. And by the way, thank you for the people in the chat. Yes, there are different types of interest rates that I'm not really getting into. But I was just trying to concentrate on the two major ones. So we basically understand what the Federal Reserve is, and we understand the Federal Reserve controls interest rates, and we all kind of understand what interest rates are, which is basically the price you pay for lending money. All right, we get that. So what the Fed was doing after the crash was keeping interest rates low and quantitative interest easing. This is a term a lot of people use. I think 4 people understand. But most people say, and I say it is, that quantitative easing is just printing money. Well, Bob, you don't know how money gets printed. But what
you're partially right, but I should clarify that, because that's the biggest misconception is. Because it's often associated, it is like the creation of money, but it's largely a privatized process. Right. It's a way to basically, some people call it privatized Keynesianism, because it's the government enlarging the reserves of banks so that they can lend out tons of money like crazy. Okay. That's basically the idea. But it's not, it's not all the central bank directly.
Yeah, and it empowers the Lords of Finance.
Yes.
You put them to determine how much money is created.
Our money in America is backed by bonds. What does that mean? Theoretically, don't jump on my neck, guys. Theoretically, every dollar you have is backed by $1's worth of debt called a bond. So every time your government theoretically issues $1, it issues $1's worth of debt that someone buys and invests in, that they said, I'm going to get XYZ amount of interest back because the United States is a strong country that pays back its debt. So I'm going to invest in American bonds. So the only thing that's really of value of your dollar is that it is backed by bonds, and it's also what's called the currency of record to buy oil. If you want to buy oil on most large markets, you use dollars. That gives it a little extra juice. Okay, so
I don't think there's a 1-1 correspondence to
Yeah, there
bond
isn't.
issuance.
well, okay,
and
I'm being overly
currency.
simplistic.
I think what you meant to say, correct me if I'm mistaken, but when the government spends more than it deletes through taxation, it basically issues bonds. It issues that debt, monetizes that debt. Someone can purchase that bond. That bond kind of functions like a savings account. You know how you have a savings account with your commercial bank. That bond, it's a savings account with the Federal Reserve, gives you interest on.
Okay,
So it does that. But yeah, that's the thing. But like for every dollar we have, it's not backed by bonds. Most of the dollars we use are private banks.
thank you for the correction. I have no
Yeah.
problem. Listen, I'm not an expert at this, but I could be wrong. But
I mean,
there
neither
is-
am I. I just learned. I just like really
There is a
studied the
correlation.
thinkers thing for about a few months. and
There is a
that's it.
correlation.
I'm not an
between-
expert either.
There's a correlation between the currency and bond issuance. When we agree that there is a correlation,
No,
you don't think there's correct?
There's a correlation between government spending and bond issuance.
Well,
And that's a
hold on.
choice. It's a
Let's
choice.
let Kuba finish this thought.
so if you and I think that OneDime put it very succinctly. Bond issuance is related to government spending under certain conditions.
Okay.
And under Keynesianism, as the principle was that government spending had to be covered by had to be balanced with borrowing, and that's where the bonds came in. But it is possible to print money in excess, or it is possible to privatize the creation of money-like assets. And one of the reasons why we have hot money and speculative bubbles is because non-currency, non-bond, non-government bond assets, things like mortgage-backed securities with
Were being
AAA ratings, take on the characteristics of money
Right.
within the financial system. So you can have private issuance of money through debt that's completely outside of the sort of federal bond, federal fiscal apparatus.
Would you argue that's a relatively new development?
No, I wouldn't, because much of the initial currency, the early currencies of most capitalist economies were just bank script.
That's a fair point. Okay, so I'm trying to find I appreciate the corrections. I was trying to be as basic as possible, and thank you for correcting me in my errors. But generally, to get to the point of quantitative easing, the Federal Reserve started buying certain types of bonds. And would you agree or you disagree? Anyone want to interject? Would you think that's
that's part of how they basically inject the reserves of private banks.
Right,
It's a way of doing that because they have those accounts. They own bonds. When you buy the bonds, it's a way of injecting cash. They go even further.
All right, stop. You said
they
a
bought
key word.
private debt.
The way of injecting cash is by buying the bonds. Now, why did he say that? Remember what I was saying? That basically for every dollar you have a bond. Why did he say the way of injecting cash was by buying the bond? That's how I got that correlation. Was by buying the bonds. Because in my mind, I'm saying there's a correlation between bond acquisition.
I don't think it's even just bonds. Quantitative easing was extended to other asset classes as
That's
well.
true. I'm trying to
So someone in the comments said that they bought corporate bonds. Yeah, so they bought corporate debt. It's a way to kind of prevent companies from collapsing, basically.
Right.
And also they do tax breaks, but that's more of a. Someone also commented. I should say they said what is fiscal and what is monetary policy.
Yeah, this is important.
I want to say that really quickly.
Who wants to take that one on?
Yeah, so fiscal policy is when the government that we elect implements a policy, they fund that policy. That's a fiscal policy. So
budgets and spending.
budgets, yeah. And monetary policy is when central banks control the money supply, really mainly to control inflation. Well, it doesn't really work by controlling interest rates and also to increase lending in the money supply. And this is monetarism is this is important too, is an ideology pioneered by neoliberalism, by Milton Friedman.
That's true.
Yeah. So the idea is because the idea that the source of all inflation is just simply excess money is heavily, well, it doesn't come from Milton Friedman, but it's popularized by Milton Friedman. And the idea for him, which really differentiates him from older liberals, is that a big role of the state via central banks is to control this inflation by increasing interest rates, lowering them when they need more money. This doesn't really work the way they intend it to, or perhaps how they intended to, but that's what I guess the audience would need to know for now.
Is introduced as a rejoinder, as a counterpart, as an opposition to Keynesianism, which uses fiscal policy and government spending to direct and maintain economic growth through business cycles. And monetarism is attractive to neoliberals and to Milton Friedman and to peak financial institutions because while fiscal policy is subject to government deliberation, to electoral outcomes, to bureaucrats within the state apparatus, planning goals, monetary policy is opaque and can be privatized very easily into the peak financial institutions.
And the Fed. And the Fed.
So,
right. So basically, Milton Friedman's monetarist worldview economically was about private institutions like the Federal Reserve, which is quasi-private, and banks taking control of the economy out of the hands of government and keeping it in the hands of private actors, which is how we get the ideas of neoliberalism. And Volcker didn't really disagree much in terms of implementing that. So we get there. So back to quantitative easing, and we're going to get to how this ties to MMT. So we got to the first thing they did was they cut interest rates. The Fed did that. They kept low interest rates after 2008. And quantitative easing, they started buying a lot of bonds, some of them of questionable value, to increase the liquidity of money and circulation of money into the market. And
at the discretion of the banks.
At the discretion of the bank. So what that did is that it caused that money was not money that was going to civilians in society. It was basically, number one, the low interest rates was allowing banks to lend money to other places that had higher interest rates.
At best, it was trickle down.
Right. It was called parity trading. You had parity trading going on. So you would have a bank. America has low interest rates. So I'm going to lend money to an Indian bank with American dollars and get paid back principal at a higher interest rates because India has a higher interest rate. So parity trading was another major boom for all of these companies, these financial services institutions, right? And then they're buying these bonds, which because there's a correlation between buying bonds and liquidity of money, the buying of the bonds starts to increase the flow of capital that goes to the same financial institutions and allows them to do things like stock buybacks, investing in new technology companies like Facebook. And all of this money is causing an increase of growth of wealth, but only at the top for those who are proximate to the financial services.
And part of it, a lot of it is artificial. A lot of it is asset price inflation.
Yes.
Right.
And can I also add something I would definitely add to your point is when they increase interest rates like they did in the Reagan era with Paul Volcker, presumably to reduce inflation. And this didn't actually reduce inflation. Inflation was prolonged in the Reagan era, didn't lower until much later. When they really increase interest rates, what does this do? You have bonds. People, yeah, that too. Just devastates the economy. But what it also does is when you have bonds at high interest rates, people are essentially getting free money. So imagine I'm a rich person. I own a lot of a government bond. I have $1 million in there, and it's a 0% or 0 point something interest rate versus a 15% interest rate, or at the very peak, interest rates were at 20%. Imagine all that. That's basically free money. And where's that money coming from? Is that coming from the taxpayer? No, it's the central bank typing it into a screen, into that person's bank account. So this is partially another function of it's free money for rich people.
I just want to make the last
the
point.
difference. Well, the difference between high interest and low interest policy environments is that in a high interest policy environment, rich people make money off of their wealth by sitting on it and just collecting interest from the Federal Reserve. In a low interest rate environment, then they make money by borrowing money at very low interest rates and finding something to buy with it, which will appreciate above that interest rate.
So it's
lend it out
rent-seeking
and get it back
behavior.
at a higher interest rate too.
Yeah, it's rent-seeking behavior.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
precisely.
All right. Hey,
I just want to say the last thing, Jason.
hey, wait. Pascal, I think you're forgetting the most important rule in podcast world, and that is that the game is to be sold, not to be told.
Yeah, but this is kind of the most important part. We can't cut them off here. We got to at least explain what MMT is here.
You have 2 minutes.
Okay, what MMT is saying, all of the stuff that was just done, quantitative easing and low interest rates, to protect the lords of capital, can be done to finance policies, Medicare for all, social policies that are good for society. So what MMT is arguing is that all that crap you did that just pours money into the capitalists, you can actually do to help society.
That's what Stephanie Kelton and certain kinds of MMTers are arguing. Yeah,
Well,
although not
what-
all of them do.
That's what MMTers sometimes, in a very crude summary, advocate for, but that's not what MMT is. But to add to your point, you're not you're partially correct in the sense that a lot of people who advocate for MMT happen to be social democrats or democratic socialists, as they call themselves. Social democrats believe you can use the state. This is nothing new. This is back to the old debates Marx had with the German social democrats, that you can use the current state to basically meet the needs of the working class. Now, this is what MMTers sometimes argue for, but it's not what MMT is. MMT is just merely a description of how the system works. How you run with that, you could run with that in many ways. You could run with that as a social democrat. You could run with that as a libertarian. Theoretically, if you're a libertarian, you could say, well, we don't need taxpayer money we don't need taxes to fund government spending. Why don't we just cut taxes super, super low? You could use it in that direction if one wanted. So the theory itself is more of a descriptive theory. If one wants to use it as a political theory, really depends. But your description of the people like Stephanie Kelton, that you can use the state, yeah, that's kind of what they argue for. But I should add, they don't advocate for quantitative easing. No MMT or maybe some social democrats, I don't know. But none of them really argue for quantitative easing, because quantitative easing is basically privatized Keynesianism. It's a way to privatize the creation of money. What they advocate more for is fiscal policy, using budgetary policy to fund things like universal health care or whatever. But I want to say, even though Stephanie Kelton advocates for stuff like that and is an MMTer, Bernie Sanders does not use these talking points. Bernie Sanders still talks as if he doesn't know this stuff. Bernie Sanders says, we are going to get the money by taxing the rich. Now,
Well,
I can understand why people say that, but
Hold
he
on.
does
We're
the
gonna-
worst thing.
Hold on. Got the Oscar music. Hold on. Will you be able to join us for a bonus half one time?
Sure.
You can?
Yeah, I'll need to get
I
some
want to
water,
get more
though.
into that conversation about what you're saying right now. And we have went five minutes over because everybody had something to say. Everyone had to get the last word. That's why, Pascal. You always go, why? Because last word, motherfuckers, that's why.
I think this was a very valuable enterprise.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean,
No,
we
I
basically-
appreciate the effort of Pascal to summarize these things because it is important to make this accessible. That's what I try to do in my videos. That's why it's a really hard thing to summarize. That's why I
It is a
spend
very
so much
hard
time
thing.
making the script.
It is a
And
very
I do want to add, I also didn't expect to jump into a MMT right away. That's why, because it's a hard topic. Thought we'd go more towards the end, but we did cover some good ground.
Does anyone disagree that we don't have to like tax the rich to do social policy? Like, does anyone? I mean, there are times when you have to, but right now, does anyone think we have to?
By the way, I really liked Tony's explanation. I was a little hesitant about the video's explanation of, oh, we don't need taxes, but the way he explained it in the beginning of I agree with his position that it's not that we don't use taxes to pay for things. This is the way that we actually set up talking about taxes and actually the paying about it is kind of a hustle.
And in closing,
Um,
I think you got Tony. If you say one word, I will walk to Canada and I will find you.
I can
That's
help with
Kuba's
that.
job.
Well, say we have a Canadian; he can do it.
But in closing, I do want to add this to Tony's point. It is very hard to make a video essay that is 20 to 25 minutes and get all of this, what we talked about in this conversation, in a short script. I have put links in the chat to Tony's work. There will definitely be links in the description on the show to Tony's YouTube page so you can see all of his videos. I think he does great work. There's a reason why he's on this show. Tony, I'm going to send you the link to the bonus champagne room. Varn and Kuba and Pascal, you guys all have the link to the champagne room.
Where'd you
If you are a patron, we will see you shortly. And we are out.